She was a top government cryptographer with level 4 security clearance. But in the gleaming lobby of the Orion Tower, her credentials meant nothing. All they saw was the color of her skin, and that was enough to make a call. The air in the Orion Tower lobby was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and success. Sunlight streamed through the two-story glass facade, glinting off the polished marble floors and the brushed steel accents that defined San Francisco's premier tech hub. It was a space designed to intimidate and inspire in equal measure. Dr. Alani Reid, however, was neither. At 35, she moved with a quiet confidence that had been earned, not given. She stepped through the revolving doors just before 10 a.m., her presence a subtle counterpoint to the lobby's sterile grandeur. She wore a charcoal gray suit jacket, impeccably tailored, over a silk shell-colored top and matching trousers that spoke of understated power. A minimalist black leather tote bag from an Italian designer rested in the crook of her arm, its weight, a classified, encrypted laptop and a portfolio of secure documents, a familiar comfort. Her hair was styled in intricate micro-braids, catching the light as she paused near a towering abstract sculpture. She nodded politely to the security guard at the main console, a man who offered a cursory glance before returning to his screen. Alani wasn't offended, anonymity was part of her trade. She touched the nearly invisible silver cochlear communications device nestled in her ear, her voice a low murmur. "Reid here. Confirming arrival at the rendezvous point. Awaiting contact." She looked every bit the high-level consultant or venture capitalist that frequented this building. But not everyone saw it that way. Behind the sweeping curve of the marble reception desk, Tiffany Finch watched Alani with a growing sense of unease. Tiffany was young, ambitious, and had learned that in her role as a junior administrative assistant, perception was reality. And her perception of the woman standing by the sculpture was one of dissonance. The woman didn't fit. She wasn't fidgeting or checking her phone impatiently like the usual tech brothers. She was too still, too observant. "Look at her," Tiffany whispered to her coworker, her voice tight with suspicion. "She's just standing there, talking to herself. Something's off." Her coworker, a man busy sorting mail, shrugged. "Probably on a call. Looks like she belongs here more than we do." But Tiffany's intuition, clouded by a bias she would never admit to having, screamed otherwise. The woman's calm felt like a performance. Her stillness felt predatory. Instead of approaching Alani or using the intercom to ask if she needed assistance, Tiffany made a decision. She picked up the phone dedicated to building security. Her voice was hushed but firm. "This is Tiffany at the front desk. There's a suspicious individual in the main lobby. A woman, she's been pacing near the West sculpture for several minutes." She conveniently omitted the part about the professional attire, the calm demeanor, or the clearly visible visitor's pass Alani had clipped to her jacket after checking in at the digital kiosk. She said nothing about the quiet confidence, only that she looked out of place. Meanwhile, Alani's earpiece chimed softly. It was Director Vance's assistant. "Dr. Reid, the director is running about 10 minutes behind schedule. A minor delay on the Bay Bridge. She asks for your patience." "Understood," Alani murmured back, her gaze sweeping across the lobby. She was used to waiting. In her line of work, patience was a weapon. She had no idea that Tiffany's vague, poisoned report was already being escalated. The building's security chief, following protocol for any suspicious individual call, had patched it through to the local SFPD precinct. The message was stripped of nuance, condensed into a dispatcher's cold summary: female, black, mid-30s, acting erratically, possibly scouting the location. The storm was gathering, and Alani Reid was standing directly in its path. 2 blocks away, a patrol car made a sharp U-turn, its lights not yet flashing. The lobby's serene atmosphere shattered when officers Cade Miller and Eva Rostova pushed through the glass doors. Miller led the way, his stride wide and purposeful, his jaw set with the grim determination of a man who saw threats around every corner. He was a veteran officer, his uniform crisp, his gaze sweeping the area with an air of proprietary authority. His partner, Rostova, was younger, her expression a mixture of duty and a flicker of apprehension as she followed in his wake. Miller's eyes landed on Alani almost immediately. She was the only black woman standing alone in the expansive space, a fact that seemed to confirm the dispatcher's report in his mind before a single word was exchanged. He marched directly toward her. "Ma'am," he began, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "We need to have a word with you." Alani turned, a flicker of surprise in her calm eyes. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" "Step away from the wall," Miller commanded, ignoring her question. "And keep your hands where I can see them." Alani's finely tuned senses, accustomed to detecting subtle shifts in geopolitical tensions, now registered a different kind of threat. This was not a simple inquiry. This was an accusation. Still, she complied, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She took a step forward, her hands held loosely at her sides. "I'm Dr. Alani Reid," she stated, her voice level. "I'm here for a scheduled 10 a.m. meeting with Director Vance at CyberHelix Dynamics on the 48th floor." Miller squinted, his eyes raking over her expensive suit as if it were a costume. "Doctor, huh? And what kind of doctor are you?" "A doctor of cryptography. I'm a contractor with the Department of Defense," she said, a hint of steel entering her tone. "My credentials are in my bag." She made a slight, instinctual move toward her tote. "Don't reach." Miller's voice cracked like a whip. His hand dropped, hovering inches from the butt of his holstered firearm. The gesture was electric, a bolt of pure menace in the sunlit lobby. The low hum of conversation nearby died instantly. A few people, sensing the shift, began to discreetly film with their phones. Alani froze, her blood turning to ice. The raw, undisguised hostility was breathtaking. "Officer," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You asked for my identification. It is in the bag you are telling me not to touch." Officer Rostova shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting from her partner to Alani. "Cade, let's just be calm." But Miller was in command. "Place the bag on the floor. Now." With a deep, controlled breath, Alani bent slowly and placed her $1,000 bag on the cold marble. The act felt profoundly humiliating, a capitulation she was unused to making. "Open it." Slowly, Miller ordered. She knelt, her movements precise, and unzipped the main compartment. "It's in the side pocket." A black leather credential holder. Rostova stepped forward and cautiously retrieved it. She flipped it open. The silence stretched as she examined the contents. First, a PhD identification card from Stanford University with Alani's photo. Next, a Department of Defense contractor card, also with her photo. And behind it, a laminated, high-level federal security clearance badge with holographic overlays and a menacing eagle emblem. It was designated Level 4. Rostova looked up, her expression changed. "Cade, it's real. Department of Defense. This is a high-level clearance." For a moment, Miller seemed to falter. But his suspicion was a deeply rooted weed. "We'll need to confirm it," he muttered, refusing to back down. "These things can be faked." "You can call Director Elena Vance at CyberHelix Dynamics," Alani offered, her voice flat. "Or you can call the verification number on the back of the card for the DARPA liaison office." Neither officer moved to make a call. Instead, Miller's eyes narrowed again. "Are you armed?" "Yes," Alani replied without hesitation. Agency-issued Glock 19, concealed, right hip. Fully authorized and declared as per federal statute. That was the final straw for Miller. On the floor, he commanded, his voice regaining its hard edge. "Sit on the floor. Hands on your knees where I can see them." Alani stared at him, a universe of disbelief and fury swirling behind her calm facade. She was a guest of one of the most powerful tech firms in the country, a vital asset to national security, and she was being ordered to sit on the floor like a common criminal. With a quiet, weary dignity, she lowered herself to the cold, unforgiving marble, the fabric of her expensive trousers wrinkling. She placed her hands on her knees and said nothing more. She just watched, her gaze locking onto Miller, a silent observer to her own debasement. The lobby was trapped in a suffocating silence, broken only by the distant city traffic and Miller's heavy breathing. He stood over Alani, a sentinel of his own prejudice, his posture radiating a tense, confrontational energy. Rostova hovered nearby, her discomfort now a palpable aura. She kept glancing at Alani's credentials, then back at her partner, a silent argument raging in her eyes. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, a soft chime echoed through the space. The doors of the central elevator slid open, and Director Elena Vance strode out. She was a woman in her late 50s, radiating an aura of absolute, no-nonsense authority. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, with a silver bob and intelligent eyes, she held a tablet in one hand. Her gaze swept the lobby, and then it froze. Her eyes widened, first in confusion, then in sheer, unadulterated fury as she took in the scene, her top cryptographer, one of the nation's most brilliant minds, sitting on the marble floor while two SFPD officers loomed over her like vultures. What in God's name is going on here? Vance's voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the tension like a razor, sharp and cold. Every head in the lobby snapped toward her. Alani looked up, a dry, humorless smile touching her lips. "Good morning, Director. It seems I've been identified as a national security threat." Vance's eyes narrowed, locking onto Miller. "You," she said, pointing a finger at him. "Explain to me, right now, why my lead consultant for Project Chimera is on the floor instead of in my boardroom." Miller, momentarily thrown off by Vance's commanding presence, puffed out his chest. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual. She was acting erratically." "Erratic?" Vance's laugh was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Dr. Reid is the calmest person in any room she enters. It's a professional necessity." "Did she resist you? Did she threaten anyone?" Rostova found her voice, her tone apologetic. "No, ma'am. She was fully compliant." "Then I'll ask you again," Vance's voice dropped, becoming dangerously cold. "Why is she on the floor?" She took a step closer, her eyes boring into Miller. "Is it because she's a black woman wearing an earpiece in a building full of people wearing earpieces?" Miller had no answer. He stood there, his authority evaporating under the heat of her glare. Alani slowly, gracefully, rose to her feet, brushing imaginary dust from her trousers. She looked at her watch. 9 minutes, Director," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating with a profound weariness. That's how long it took. 9 minutes to go from a DARPA asset to a potential felon. Vance's jaw tightened. "You are cleared, Alani. Go on up. I'll handle this." She turned back to the officers, her expression glacial. "If you still require confirmation, my number is on this card. But let me make it simple for you. Dr. Reid is an 8-year veteran of federal contract work. She recently identified and neutralized a ransomware attack that would have crippled this city's entire financial district. The mayor gave her a commendation. Now, unless you plan on arresting the woman who saved the stock exchange, I suggest you lower your weapons and your tone." Just as the officers were reeling from this revelation, the building's head of security, a tall man named Darrell, rushed over, his face pale with urgency. He leaned in toward Vance, his voice low and strained. "Director Vance, we have a problem. A real one." Vance's brows rose. "What now?" "We reviewed the surveillance footage from before Dr. Reid's arrival," Darrell said, his words tumbling out. "There was another individual here. 5 minutes before she arrived. He left a small, black hard-shell case under the planter by the north wall. Alani's head snapped up, her exhaustion instantly replaced by a razor-sharp focus. "Where is it now?" Daryl hesitated. "We haven't retrieved it. We were waiting on bomb squad protocols." The footage, it shows him deliberately placing it, looking over his shoulder. It wasn't random. The tension in the lobby, already tight, coiled into something far more lethal. The ticking clock was no longer just a metaphor. Vance straightened, her voice ringing with authority. "Daryl, secure this lobby. Evacuate all non-essential personnel. Lock down the elevators." She turned to Alani, a new understanding in her eyes. "You're with me." Behind the reception desk, Tiffany looked up, her face ashen with alarm. "Wait," she stammered, "what do you mean, bomb squad?" No one answered her. The real world had just crashed her little drama. The shift was instantaneous and absolute. The petty drama of racial profiling evaporated, replaced by the cold, efficient reality of a genuine security threat. Alani Reid, the humiliated suspect, transformed before their eyes. She was no longer a victim on the floor, she was a commander on a battlefield. "Patch me into the Joint Operations Command," she spoke crisply into her comms device, her voice devoid of emotion. "Possible IED confirmed. Orion Tower, main lobby. Coordinates locked. I need full surveillance access, 5-minute window prior to my arrival. Scrub all audio and thermal imaging for anomalies." The officers, Miller and Rostova, stood frozen, suddenly relegated to the role of stunned bystanders. They were out of their depth, watching a federal-level incident response unfold with a speed and precision they couldn't comprehend. The authority they had wielded so carelessly just moments before now seemed laughably insignificant. Vance was already on her phone. "Get me the regional director for the task force. Tell them we're activating contingency protocol Alpha 7. We need eyes on the perimeter, and I want a profile on every person who entered this lobby in the last hour." While the security team began ushering bewildered employees toward the exits, Alani and Vance moved toward the security console. The tension was a living thing, a palpable fear of the unknown hidden inside the black case. In a brief lull, while waiting for a data stream, Vance turned her steely gaze back to Officer Miller, who was standing awkwardly, trying to look useful and failing. "You know, officer," she said, her tone conversational but laced with ice, "before this real emergency interrupted us, Dr. Reid had a task to complete this morning. A rather mundane one. She was reviewing a transfer application." Miller looked at her blankly, not understanding the relevance. "It was from an SFPD officer," Vance continued, "an officer hoping to secure a coveted spot on the new cybercrime joint task force. A unit that DARPA is helping coordinate." A cold dread began to dawn on Rostova's face. She muttered, "You're kidding." Vance didn't blink. Her eyes slid from Rostova and locked directly onto Miller, pinning him in place. The file was marked with the name, Officer Cade Miller. It landed on Dr. Reid's desk yesterday. The color drained from Miller's face. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "No, you didn't," Vance said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You detailed your academy scores, your field experience, even your bravery commendation from last year. It was a strong file. Impressive, even." Alani, her eyes still scanning the incoming data on a monitor, spoke without turning around. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, which made the words cut even deeper. "I had marked it for a priority interview," she said simply. "I thought you had solid instincts." The shame that washed over Miller's face was profound. It was a complete, systemic failure. The man who prided himself on his instincts had just demonstrated the worst instincts possible. He had profiled, humiliated, and nearly drawn his weapon on the very person who held his career ambitions in her hands. The air grew thick again, but this time it wasn't with tension. It was with the crushing weight of accountability. You were minutes away from an interview that could have changed your life, Vance added, twisting the knife. Instead, you put a federal agent on the floor, ignored her credentials, and wasted 9 critical minutes while a potential bomb was sitting 50 feet away. All because you couldn't see past the color of her skin. No one responded. Miller looked like he wanted the marble floor to swallow him whole. Behind the desk, Tiffany had shrunk, trying to become invisible. The ultimate irony had been delivered, and it was devastating. The immediate threat was eventually neutralized. The bomb squad arrived, and the black case was found to contain not an explosive, but a sophisticated piece of industrial espionage hardware, a rogue data capture device. The crisis was averted, but the more personal one lingered, poisoning the air in the now quiet lobby. Once the all-clear was given, Alani turned her attention from the monitors. The professional mask slipped, revealing the deep, bone-weary exhaustion beneath. She walked slowly toward the reception desk, her gaze falling upon Officer Miller, Officer Rostova, and Tiffany, who was now weeping silently. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud or angry. It was something far more powerful, a quiet, piercing wave of disappointment. "This," she began, her gaze sweeping over the three of them, "is what we talk about when we talk about bias. It doesn't always show up with sirens and violence." She looked directly at Tiffany. "Sometimes, it's just a phone call, based on a feeling that someone doesn't belong. She then turned to Miller. "Sometimes, it's a hand hovering over a holster for 9 straight minutes, turning a citizen into a threat because you've already made up your mind." Miller finally managed to speak, his voice choked with shame. I didn't realize." "And that," Vance interjected sharply, stepping beside Alani, "is the entire problem. You didn't realize because you didn't look. You didn't listen. You saw a stereotype, not a person." Alani's focus shifted to Officer Rostova, who was looking at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "You saw my credentials," Alani said, her tone softer but no less pointed. "You held them in your hand. You knew they were real. But you chose silence. You let it happen." Rostova's head snapped up, tears welling in her eyes. "I did," she admitted, her voice trembling. "And I was wrong. I was a coward." Alani gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Finally, she looked at Tiffany, who was cowering behind the desk. The young woman's tear-streaked face was a mask of regret. I was just trying to be safe," Tiffany whispered. "I didn't want to take any risks." "The irony is," Alani said, her voice flat and heavy, "I was standing right next to the building directory the entire time. It lists every company, including CyberHelix. You could have just asked my name. You could have asked, 'Ma'am, can I help you?' That was the risk-free option. You chose a different one." Tiffany's mouth opened, then closed again. There was no defense. The elevator chimed, and Director Vance's actual appointment, a man from Apex Solutions, stepped out, looking confused by the lingering police presence. Vance gestured for Alani. "We're late." Alani picked up her tote bag. But just before stepping into the elevator, she paused and looked back at Miller, who stood frozen, a statue of broken pride. "I want you to remember one thing, officer," Alani said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "The only difference between you and me in that lobby today? I never for a second doubted who I was." Miller didn't answer. For the first time since he had entered the building, he no longer looked like an officer of the law. He just looked like a man, reckoning with a moment of failure he could never erase. Alani turned and stepped into the elevator beside Vance. The doors slid shut, sealing them in. Upstairs, in the sterile quiet of the CyberHelix boardroom, the briefing on Project Chimera went on. Alani was flawless. She presented her findings with her usual clarity and precision, the pain and humiliation of the morning tucked deep behind a wall of practiced professionalism. That's what agents do. They compartmentalize. They move on. The consequences unfolded quietly but decisively in the hours that followed. Director Vance made a single phone call to the SFPD chief of police. Officer Miller's application to the Joint Task Force was immediately withdrawn, and he was placed on administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation. Tiffany Finch was fired before lunch, escorted from the building with her personal effects in a cardboard box. An hour later, her meeting concluded, Alani stepped out of the elevator back into the main lobby. She didn't expect anyone to still be there. The space was mostly empty now, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the marble. But she was wrong. Officer Eva Rostova stood quietly near a pillar, her posture unguarded, her hat in her hands. She had been waiting. As Alani walked past, Rostova stepped forward. Dr. Reid. Alani stopped and turned, her expression neutral. I waited, Rostova said, her voice steady and clear, because I needed to say this. No one told me to. This isn't for a report. Alani said nothing, only listened, granting her the attention she hadn't been given earlier. You were right, Rostova continued, meeting Alani's gaze directly. I saw your ID. I knew it was real, and I let it all unfold anyway. I froze. I didn't stand up for what was right when I should have. I failed you, and I failed my duty as an officer. I won't forget that. Alani studied her face for a long moment. There was no performance here, no attempt to excuse her actions. There was only raw, honest accountability. We don't always choose the moments that define us, Alani said finally, her voice softer than before. But we always choose how we respond to them. What you do tomorrow, and the day after that, will define what kind of officer you become. The choice is still yours. Rostova nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Thank you, Doctor. Alani gave a respectful nod in return and walked away. The building's revolving doors pushed open in front of her, spilling her out into the bright California sunshine. The warmth on her skin felt good, but a chill remained deep inside. The incident was over, but the wound it left was not. Such 9-minute trials happen every day, in lobbies, on sidewalks, and during traffic stops, far from the eyes of security cameras. This was not just Alani Reid's story. It is the story of countless others, a snapshot of a persistent, painful truth. This incident raises so many questions about bias and accountability. What do you think should be the real consequences for the officer and the receptionist? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that matters. Please, comment with respect for everyone involved.